Eber and Azurad, who are the descendants of Kush. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. From a biological and genetic point of view, what population would the early descendants of Eber be? In order to solve this riddle, looking at the Book of Jubilees is key because I believe it provides us the clues to his early descendants. The Book of Jubilees is considered the Little Genesis. The Book of Jubilees was found in the Qumran caves with the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is from Desert News. Experts just discovered more fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Reading what's in yellow, a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls of text from the Book of Jubilees is on display in the exhibit Dead Sea Scrolls. Between 1947 and 1956, approximately 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is, oh, by the way, that was from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, and this is from the University of Notre Dame, translating the Book of Jubilees. So it says, originally written in Hebrew, Jubilees continues to interest scholars for its commentary on earlier texts. James Van Kim is the John A. O'Brien Professor of Hebrew Scriptures at the University of Notre Dame and a scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient religious texts found between 1947 and 1956 in caves in and around Qumran, along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, about 15 miles east of Jerusalem. With this is why everything that I just said is why I trust the Book of Jubilees to be from a historical perspective. Therefore, I read the Book of Jubilees only for history, but not for spiritual edification. With that being said, let's look at the relevant portion dealing with the wife of Eber. According to the Book of Jubilees, Eber married a woman named Azured. Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verse 6 through 10, Eber. And he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. She bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. The Book of Jubilees mentions the name of Nimrod, the Greek form of Nimrod, only as being the father of Azurad and the wife of Eber, the mother of Peleg. Chapter 8, verse 7. This account would thus make Nimrod an ancestor of Abraham and hence of all Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. Kush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. The son of Kush, and therefore the great grandson of Noah, Nimrod. And Cush was the oldest son of Ham and the grandson of Noah. This was mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 7. So Cush. Cush is a Hebrew name that is possibly derived from Cash, the Egyptian name of Lower Egypt, and later of the Nubian kingdom of Nabata, known as the Kingdom of Kush. The form Kush appears in Egyptian records as early as the reign of Menemhotep II in an inscription detailing his campaigns against the Nubian region. The Nubian kingdom was centered at Merou in the modern-day nation of Sudan. Kush was the name, and this is from jewishvirtuallibrary.org. Kush was the name of an ancient kingdom in northeast Africa. The portion of the Nile Valley between the first and sixth cataracts was called Kush by the Pharaonic Egyptians, though Western nations preferred the Greek application Nubia. One of the earliest mentions of the name Kush is found on an inscription of the early Middle Kingdom, 1970 BCE. During the second millennium BCE, Kush was absorbed into the Egyptian Empire, first as far as the Second Cataract under the Middle Kingdom rulers, and then as far as the Sixth by the New Kingdom pharaohs. It was probably the Kushite king Shabako 707 through 696 who encouraged Hezekiah of Judah to resist the Assyrians under Sennacherib and sent the relief army that the Assyrians crushed at the Battle of Helikot in 701 BCE. Since the Harqua mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 9 and Isaiah chapter 37 verse 9 had not yet come to the throne. According to the Bible, Cush was the son of Ham and the eponym of the Northeast African people. Most modern translations follow the Septuagint. The whole of East Africa was called Cush by the Greeks. So Cush, son of Ham, also his descendants, also a land in the South Nile Valley, a land and people of Southern Nile Valley. And as you can see on the screen, Kush, ancient Kush, would have been in Sudan, modern day country of Sudan, and slightly lower part of modern day southern Egypt. So the kingdom of Kush was an ancient kingdom in Nubia centered along the Nile River or Nile Valley in what is now northern Sudan and southern Egypt. And so there's another map showing ancient Kush. So the kingdom of Kush, despite the Egyptian presence in Upper Nubia, the indigenous culture of the region continued to flourish. And that was from Britannia. This is from World History Encyclopedia, the Kingdom of Kush. Kush was a kingdom in northern Africa, in the region corresponding to modern-day Sudan, the larger region around Kush, later referred to as Nubia, was inhabited 8000 BCE, but the kingdom of Kush rose much later. The Kerma culture, so named after the city of Kerma in the region, is attested by early as 2500 BCE, and archaeological evidence from Sudan and Egypt show that Egyptians and the people of Kush region were in contact from the early dynastic period in Egypt, 3150 through 2613 BCE onwards. And this is from the Met.com, the land of Nubia. The region of Nubia begins at the point just south of Khartoum in the Sudan, where the Blue and White Nile join, and is linked to Egypt by the river Nile, which flows northward through both lands to the Mediterranean. The first cataract just south of Aswan in Egypt shows the separation of Nubia and Egypt and Nubia, while the second cataract separates upper south and lower north Nubia. And this is from Daily Life of the Nubians, a book by Robert Stephen. And so it says the ancient Egyptians referred to a region located south of the third cataract of the Nile River in which the Nubians dwelt as Kush, most often in the phrase Val Kush or Wretched Kush. And this book is from the Nubian Past and Archaeology of Sudan by David N. Edwards. And so it says the name of Nubia has long been used to describe Egypt's southern neighbor. Historically, other names uh, have been applied to this region and its inhabitants, Kush being a widely used term in the ancient world, as well as Ethiopia. And this book is called Ancient Nubia by P. L. Shini. And it says the land of Nubia stretching along the river Nile from the first cataract southwards has never been very closely or accurately defined. The name Nubia has been used in a much wider sense when dealing with the past, and sometimes it has been used as almost contemporaneous with the ancient Sudan, the area of the present Republic of the Sudan. It has been suggested that the name comes from the ancient Egyptian word nub, meaning gold, since the area was an important source of gold in pharaonic times, and later, but it is not the name of the ancient Egyptians used for the country, and the suggestion may be fanciful. The Egyptians frequently called the area Ta Seti, land of the bow, or Kush, probably a name used by the inhabitants themselves. And this is from the University of Chicago, Nubian Galleries, and the Kerma culture. And so it says the kingdom of Kush was ruled from Kerma. The most powerful Nubian state of the early second millennium BC was based at Kerma, a partly fortified settlement near the third cataract. So Kerma was the capital city of the Kerma culture, which was located in present day Sudan at least 5,500 years ago. Kerma was one of the largest archaeological sites in ancient Nubia. And as you can see on the screen, there's the Kerma culture, which would have been in Nubia, also in modern day Sudan, as you can see. And this book is The Oxford History of Ancient Egypt by Ian Shaw. And it says the king of Kush is the name given in Egyptian sources to the king whose capital lay at Kerma. Archaeologists use Kerma as an adjective to describe the culture of the Kushites and to distinguish it from other contemporary Nubian cultures, such as Sea Group and Pangrave. Kerma is situated south of the Third Cataract at its termination of the Western Oasis route and is being excavated by Charles Beaumont at the University of Grenoble. The Kerma people kept no written records, but we know that their culture, found throughout Nubia, goes back to the early Old Kingdom. The Kerma Nubians were cattle breeders and warriors, particularly famous as bowmen. And this book is called Historical Dictionary of Ancient and Medieval Nubia by Richard A. Lobelman Jr. Kush. This is the name for a region and kingdom centered in Nubia. The term Kush and Kerma are particularly difficult to extract from each other. This dictionary refers to Kerma as the period from about 2500 through 15,000 BCE, and Kush for the time thereafter until the end of Meroe in the 4th century CE. Some Middle Kingdom Egyptian records began to use the term Kush for what is now Kerma, for what is now called Kerma. The more consistent use of Kush begins in the New Kingdom colonial occupation, when Nubia was brought under the authority of the viceroy of Kush, or the king's son of Nubia. Thus, Kush may or may not be the true lineal descent of Kerma, depending on one's definition of territory, nomenclature, or history. But it does seem that the impulse towards Nubian state formation of Kerma was reborn with Kush, the 15th dynasty, the 25th dynasty, after the intrusive centuries of New Kingdom, which was from 1567 through 1060 BC, 1090 BC. Colonialization of Kush ended. And this is from thought.com, the Kingdom of Kush, sub-Saharan African rulers of the Nile. The roots of the Kushite kingdom emerged near the third cataract of the Nile River in the early 3rd millennium BC, developed from cattle pastoralists who are known to archaeologists as the A group or pre-Kerma culture. The Kushite kingdom is mentioned as Kush or Kush in the Old Testament. Ethiopia in ancient Greek literature, and Nubia to the Romans. Nubia may have been derived from an Egyptian word for gold, nub. The Egyptians called Nubia Ta Seti. This is Nubia and the Nuba people. Early settlements sprouted in both Upper and Lower Nubia. Egyptians referred to Nubia as Ta Seti. Modern scholars typically refer to the people from this area as the A group culture. Fertile farmland just south of the Third Cataract is known as the pre-Kerma culture in Upper Nubia, as they are the ancestors. The Neolithic people of the Nile Valley, likely from Sudan, came from Sudan, as well as the Sahara. Saharan rock reliefs depict scenes that have been thought to be suggestive of a cattle cult, typically of those seen throughout parts of eastern Africa and the Nile Valley, even to this day. Around 3500 BC, the second Nubian culture, termed the A group, arose. It was a contemporary of the ethnicity and culturally very similar to the politices in pre-dynastic Naqada in Upper Egypt. The Nubian culture may have even contributed to the unification of the Nile Valley. So Ta Seti, this was mentioned a lot. This is what the Egyptians called Nubia. Ta Seti marked the border area towards Nubia, and the name was also used to refer to Nubia itself. And the Ta main city was Abu Elephantine, part of modern Aswan, and among other cities is Philippi, modern Philippia, Sunwit, modern Aswan, and Pa Subek, modern Komb Obu. Sorry for my mispronunciations. The district's main deity was Horus, and among other major deities were Anuet, Isis, Sati, Sobok, just to name a few. The Ta-Seti people and their identity is still trying to be deciphered. Today, from what is known, they are believed to have spoken a Nilo-Saharan language. Now, that's very interesting and important to keep in mind. So they believe that they may have spoken a Nilo-Saharan language, the people of Ta-Seti. So let's keep going. So when it comes to ancient Kush, Kush is Nubia, and Kush and Nubia are seen in modern day country of Sudan. This is one thing I want to make it clear, that when the Kushites are mentioned in scripture, it's likely referring to the people, the Nubians of Nubia, Ta-Seti, basically the people of modern day Sudan, Sudanese. But now let's go back to the ancient groups. So this is from a Handbook of Ancient Nubia, Volume 1. by Drinrich Ryu. Sorry for my mispronunciation. I believe that's German. But the A group and the C group's languages. So now let's look into the language. What language did these people speak? The A group population was settled along the Nile between the north of Aswan and the Second Cataract from approximately 3700 until 2800 BC. It predates the Wadi Wohor diaspora, so that it is unlikely that the language of the A group might have belonged to the Northeast Sudanic family. Kerma, the ancient African kingdom. The kingdom of Kerma was an indigenous Nilotic culture that emerged around the 3rd millennium BC, most likely from the C group culture in the south part of the Upper Nile, of the Upper Nubia. However, archaeologists now believe that Kerma was most likely one of the earliest African kingdoms identified in the Egyptian texts from the Middle Kingdom, with the name of Kush that rose to prominence due to its strategic position on several cavern routes linking with Egypt, the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa, and sub-Saharan Africa. So, we often heard that Nilo-Saharan is likely the language that these people spoke. So let's learn a little bit about that. The Nilo-Saharan languages are a proposed family of African languages spoken by some 50 through 60 million people, mainly in the upper parts of the Chari and Nile rivers, including historic Nubia, north of where the two tributaries of the Nile meet. And it's typically spoken from Libya to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, even in Egypt to Tanzania in the east. Now let's look into the Eastern Sudanic. In most classifications, the Eastern Sudanic languages are a group of 9 families of languages that may contribute to a branch of the Nilo-Saharan language family. Eastern Sudanic languages are spoken from southern Egypt to northern Tanzania. And as you can see down below is basically the tree. You see now Saharan, and there's a lot of various subdivisions. These are the subdivisions of Nile Saharan. Our focus was on the Eastern Sudanic. Then over here with the Eastern Sudanic, they even have their own breakup. The linguistic classifications, it descends from Nile Saharan. The subdivisions, there's a northern and then there's a southern. And we're going to focus on the northern, which includes Nubian. Very interesting. So, the Northern Eastern Sudanic. Northern Eastern Sudanic, from its subdivision, as you can see right here, Nubian. So now let's look at the Nubian languages. Nubian languages are a group of related languages spoken by the Nubians. They form a branch of the Eastern Sudanic languages, which is part of the wider Nilo-Saharan phylum. And so here is the linguistic classification again, showing the tree, Nilo-Saharan to Eastern Sudanic to Northeastern Sudanic to Nubian. And then there's subdivisions even with the Nubian, with the now Nubian and the Western Nubian. So let's look at a few trees created by various linguists like Lion Lee Benner. Here's his breakdown of the Eastern Sudanic languages, going from it all the way to Nubian and even Nilotic. And here's another one by Riley, the Eastern Sudanic, going from Nubian to Nilotic. Here's another one by Starstrand, Eastern Sudanic and Nubian tree. And you can pause this at your own time to look into it. This is another one. Roger Bench, the Eastern Sudanic branch, going all the way to Nilotic and Nubian. And so now let's look at the Nilotic languages. So the Nilotic languages are a group of related languages spoken across a wide area between South Sudan and Tanzania by the Nilotic peoples. And here, of course, is the linguistic classification: Nilo-Saharan to Eastern Sudanic to Nilotic. Then you have the subdivisions: Eastern Nilotic, Southern Nilotic, Western Nilotic. So, in most classifications, the Eastern Sudanic languages are a group of 9 families of languages that may constitute a branch of the Nilo-Saharan language family. Eastern Sudanic languages are spoken from southern Egypt to northern Tanzania. And as I showed earlier, here is the Nilo-Saharan, Eastern Sudanic subdivisions, northern, which includes Nubian, but we're going to focus on the southern, which is of course Nilotic. So why is all this important? So a proto-Nilotic unity separate from a earlier underivative Eastern Sudanic unity is assumed to have emerged by the 3rd millennium BC. The Eastern Sudanic unity must have been considerably earlier, still perhaps around the 5th millennium BC. The original locus of the early Nilotic speakers was presumably east of the Nile in what is now southern Sudan. The Proto-Nilots of the 3rd millennium BC were pastoralists, while their neighbors, the Proto-Central Sudanic peoples, were mostly agriculturalists. Nilotic people practiced a mixed economy of cattle pastoralism, fishing, and seed cultivation. Genetics and linguist studies have demonstrated that Nubian people in northern Sudan and southern Egypt are a mixed group that started off as a population closely related to Nilotic people. So Nubians in their origin would have been very closely related to the Nilotic people. The Nubians are considered to be the descendants of the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley, who later formed the Kingdom of Kush, which included Kerma and Meroe, and the medieval kingdoms of Makria, Nabotia, and Almodai. Excuse me for my pronunciations. These studies suggest that populations closely related to Nilotic people long inhabited the Nile Valley as far as south as southern Egypt in antiquity. So linguistically, Nilotic people are divided into 3 subgroups: Eastern Nilotic, Southern Nilotic, and Western Nilotic. And as we can see, to me, I'm starting to believe that when it comes to Kush, the son of Ham, perhaps his descendants would be these Nilotic people, these Nilo-Saharan people. The Nubians would have been the Kushites that the Hebrews would have encountered. And I believe, using logic, it is safe to assume that the Nilotic people, the Nilo-Saharan people, and the Nubians are the descendants of Kush. But let's keep going and go a little bit more deeper. So let's look at the DNA, because this is how we'll determine this question. So when it comes to the DNA, Khoisan populations in the southwest and Nilotic populations in the northeast of the Nile Valley. BT is a subclade of haplogroup A, and more precisely of the A1b clade. So let's go deeper. Upper Nile, haplogroup A3b2-M13 is common among the southern Sudanese at 53%, especially the Dinka Sudanese at 61.5%. A study by Henson at 2008 study analyzed the Y DNA of populations in the Sudan region, with various local Nilotic groups included for comparison. The researchers found the signal of Nilotic A and B clades to be the most common paternal lineages among the Nilo-Saharan speakers, except those inhabiting western Sudan. There is a prominent North African influence was noted. Haplogroup A was observed amongst 62% of the Dinka, 53.3% of the Shiluku, 46.4% of the Nuba, 33.3% of the Nuer, 31.3% of the Fur, and 18.8% of the Masalet. And so here is a map showing haplogroup A, all the peoples who have it, Nilo-Saharans to Khoisanes to Nilotic groups. These are all the people with some of the highest amounts of haplogroup A. And here's a map showing haplogroup A. As we can see, it is actually quite nicely dispersed throughout the entire continent, but you do see a very large percent of it specifically in the Nile Valley region, but also in southern Africa. So it's fairly interesting. Here is another map showing how high haplogroup A is in the Nile Valley region, the same region where ancient Kush and ancient Nubia was. I'm starting to have a belief that haplogroup A perhaps could represent Kush, son of Ham, and Hamitic peoples. But let's keep going. Here is another map showing the ancient branches of haplogroup A as well as B in sub-Saharan Africa. And here's a study, Deep Paternal Genetic Roots in Africa from Scoseria, 2014, shows that the old North African groups were A1A, A1B, A3B2, and possibly B1. So haplogroup A at one point was in North Africa. It's very important and very interesting because this would have been your Hamites. And haplogroup A would have even been in West Africa. A study came out showing that ancient West African foragers, in the context of African population history, the oldest haplogroup markers in West Africa were haplogroup A and B before E came in and pushed them out. But haplogroup A was very dominant in the past all throughout the continent of Africa. Things have changed over the years, but it was once a dominant haplogroup, A and B. So here's the distribution of haplogroup B. It is still nicely dispersed throughout the continent of Africa. And here's A, evenly dispersed as well. And E would have came in and pushed A, but as you can see, A and B is mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. E is mostly in North Africa today among Afro-Asiatic speakers. But haplogroup A and B, as you can see right here, it's typically considered to be, African, true African. And as you can see right here, E is typically Afro-Mediterranean or Afro-Middle Eastern. But let's keep going. So now let's look into the morphology, the phenotype of these people. What would they have looked like? Dental analysis of A group fossils found affinities with populations inhabiting Northeast Africa, in Northeast Africa, the Nile Valley, and East Africa. Among the sample populations, the A group people were nearest to the Kerma culture bearers, and Kush population in Upper Nubia, and to Ethiopians, followed by the Meroic X group and Christian period inhabitants of Lower Nubia, and the Khaleesi population in the Dakar Oasis, as well as C group and Pharaonic era Egyptians excavated in Lower Nubia and ancient Egyptians. The linguistic affinity of the A group culture is unknown. Uh, Beyond this, Riley states that the range of possibilities remains wide and includes a language belonging to either a non-Northeastern Sudanic branch of the Nilo-Saharan language family. So, the cryometric analysis of Kerma fossils compare them to various other early populations inhabiting the Nile Valley and Maghreb, found that they were morphology close to pre-dynastic Egyptians from Naqada, 4000 through 3200 BC. Dental traits analysis Dental trait analysis of Kerma fossils found affinities with various groups inhabiting the Nile Valley, Horn of Africa, and Northeast Africa, especially to other ancient populations from the central and northern Sudan. Among the sampled populations, the Kerma people were overall nearest to the Kush populations in Upper Nubia, the A group bearers of Lower Nubia, and to Ethiopians, followed by the Moronic, the X group, and Egyptian period, inhabiting of Lower Nubia, and then to the C group and Pharaonic era skeletons exhibited in Lower Nubia, and ancient Egyptians. And as you can see, is the area that we're dealing with, which is in Sudan, on the right hand side of the screen. But now, when it comes to phenotype, this is likely what the Hamitic Kushites would have looked like. So here's the Nilo-Hamitic type. It is an intermediate type between the Nilot and Ethiopid that is associated with the Nilo-Hamites or half Hamites. Dark brown to black skin, usually kinky, sometimes tight curly hair. And the pre-Nilotic is obviously would be a Cushitic type, a true Kushite, true Hamite type, ancient type with proto-Nilot traits still found in the border region of Sudan and Ethiopia, black skin, and kinky, sometimes tight curly hair. Here is the Nilot, specialized African type native to the swamps and savannas of the upper Nile region of South Sudan and adjacent countries. With their black skin, they belong to the darkest people on Earth. Heads long, facial features coarse, with a rather wide nose, full lips, and kinky hair. Nilots seem to be a relatively old group that might have expanded further east into Ethiopia during prehistoric times. And there's, by the way, maps below for you to see, and they are in the Nile Valley region. Here's the South Nilot, type common to the southern branch of Nilotic people of Lake Albert, south of Lake Victoria, in South Sudan, Uganda, and western Kenya. Black skin and kinky hair. Here is the East Sudanic, isolated Sudanic variety of the Nuba Mountains of Kufwan/Sudan, native to the region at least since the Neolithic. Dark brown, sometimes black skin, usually kinky hair. As you can see, they're also in the Sahara and in the Nile Valley region. The Dinkid or Dinka, a Nilot proper that shows the most pronounced Nilotic features. The tallest, most long-legged, one of the darkest phenotypes in the world, typically found in the swamp area of the Upper Nile in South Sudan. They have black skin and kinky hair, very tall, the tallest of all modern phenotypes. And as you can see down below, they are in the Nile Valley region. And you have the Shlikid Nilot variety similar to the Dinkid, but with slightly modified features, typically found in the savannas of the Upper Nile of South Sudan, black skin, usually kinky, sometimes tightly curly hair. So, when it comes to the Kushites, this is who I say that they are. 1. Geographically ancient Nubia in modern day Sudan. Linguistically, they will be Nilo-Saharan speakers or Nilotic speakers. Well, I suppose Nilotic descends from Nilo-Saharan. But number 3, genetically, their haplogroup would be Y DNA haplogroup A. Phenotype, they will be a Nilotic phenotype or a Saharan phenotype. And ethnically, they are a Nilotic/Nilo-Saharan people. This is who the Kushites of Ham would be. And you can use this model for an old Earth and a young Earth. I believe this for both a young Earth and an old Earth, that this is who Kushites would be. Haplogroup A, linguistically Nilo-Saharan, living in Nubia or Sudan, and the people will be Nilotic and Nilo-Saharan. In the future, I'll give a more proper in-depth video on Kush, son of Ham, but let's return back to Eber and Azurad. So, why is knowing who the Kushites are important? Remember, according to the Book of Jubilees, Eber marries Azurad. Azurad is the daughter of Nimrod, and Nimrod is the son of Kush, and Kush is the son of Ham. Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verse 10. Eber, and he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. She bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. The Book of Jubilees mentions the name Nimrod, the Greek form of Nimrod, only as being the father of Azurad, the wife of Eber, the mother of Peleg. This account would thus make Nimrod an ancestor of Abraham, and hence all Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. It is highly likely that Cushites who descend from Cush, son of Ham, are Nilo-Saharans. Therefore, it is highly likely that Azurat is Nilotic. As we went over, when it comes to the origins of Cush's descendants, they would be a proto-Nilotic group of people whom Nubians would also be related to. But the question still remains, why is this important? 1. The mother of the Hebrew race would have been an African Hamitic woman, specifically Nilo-Saharan. 2. This shows that there was early admixture between Asiatics and Africans. And 3. Knowing that Azured is Nilotic can help us search for the mitochondrial DNA of early Hebrew women. With that being said, what is the typical mitochondrial marker of Nilotic women? An mtDNA study by Christie in 2008 examined the mitochondrial ancestry of various Nilotic populations in Kenya and Turkana, Samburu, Masaya, and Luau individuals sampled. By the way, forgive me for those pronunciations. The mitochondrial, the mtDNA of almost all of the tested Nilots belong to various sub-Saharan micro haplogroup L subclades, including L0, L2, L3, L4, and L5. What's interesting about these L markers is that we actually do find them in the ancient Middle East. Specifically, let's focus on L2. We found a lot of L3, but I want to focus on L2. Haplogroup L2A1 has been found in ancient fossils associated with pre-pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Halel, Syria. Very interesting. We find it in Syria. A specimen excavated at the Savannah Pastoral Neolithic site of Luxamanda in Tanzania also carried the L2A1. Admixture clustering analysis further indicated that the individual bore significant ancestry from the ancient Levant. So we find an L2A1 sample in Syria, and we find L2A1 samples in Africa with Levantine ancestry, ancient Levantine ancestry. Very interesting. L2A. So its L2A subclade is a somewhat frequent and widely distributed mtDNA cluster on the continent, as well as among African Americans. Several L2 haplotypes observed in Guyanans and other West African populations share genetic matches with East Africa and North Africa. The origin for L2B, L2C, L2D, and L2E in West or Central Africa seems likely. The early diversity of L2 can be observed all over the continent of the African continent. But as we can see in subclades section below, the highest diversity is found in West Africa. Most of subclades are largely confined to West and West Central Africa. L2 has 5 main subbranches or subhaplogroups: L2A, L2B, L2C, L2D, and L2E. Of these lineages, the most common subclade is L2A, which is found in both Africa and the Levant. Very interesting. L2A is wide L2A is widespread in Africa, and the most common and widely distributed sub-Saharan African haplogroup is also somewhat frequent at 19% in the Americas among descendants of Africans. It is particularly uh, it is uh, it is particularly abundant in Chad at 38% of the sample, 33 undifferentiated L2 samples of Chad Arabs, and in non-Bantu populations in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania at 38%, about 33 in Mozambique, and 32 in Ghana. In East Africa, L2A was found 15% in the Nile Valley, Nubia, 5% of Egyptians, 14% of Kushite speakers, 15% of Semitic Amhara, 10% of Goreg, 6% of Tigrayan people, 13% of Ethiopians, and 5% of Yemenis. So as you can see, it's very highly distributed even among Afro-Asiatic peoples. Haplogroup L2A also appears in North Africa, its highest frequency, 20% of Tuareg, Fulani, 14%. Found also among some Algerian Arabs, it is found at 10% among Moroccan Arabs, some Moroccan Berbers, and Tunisian Berbers. All L2 clades present in Ethiopia are mainly derived from the two subclades L2A1 and L2B. The majority, 26 out of 33 African Americans, share haplogroup L2A. Complete sequences could be partitioned into 4 subclades by substitutions at NPS L2A1E-3495, L2A1A1, L2A1A-3918, L2A1F-5581, and L2A1I-15229. So, L2 haplogroup L2A1B is defined by substitutions at 16189 and 10143, 16192 is also common in L2A1B and L2A1C. It appears in North Africa and Egypt. It also appears in southeastern Africa, and it may also be a marker for the Bantu expansion. And with all that being said, just keep in mind haplogroup L2A1 has been found in ancient fossils associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Halula, Syria. So now let's look at some papers. This is from Ethiopian Mitochondrial DNA Heritage, tracing gene flow across and around the tier of gates. All Ethiopian L2A lineages can be seen as derived from 2 subclades, L2A1 and L2B. However, whereas the majority, 26 out of 33 of African American L2A complete sequences could be partitioned into 4 subclades by substitutions at NSB 3495, 3918, 5581, and 15229. So here's a map of mitochondrial haplogroup L2A1, and as we can see, it is seen all throughout Africa and seen in the Middle East. and the Mediterranean. It is definitely widely distributed. So L2A1C1 has a North African origin. It is observed in Tunisia, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Jews, Hebrews, Moroccans, Egyptians, Nubians, and Yemenis. And again, haplogroup L2A1 has been found in ancient fossils associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Helula, Syria. So, there are actually a lot of Jewish people with haplogroup L2, L2A. So, L2A1, L2A is recognized as an Ashkenazic specific haplogroup seen amongst Ashkenazi Jews with ancestry in Central and Eastern Europe, where it is presumed to have come from Ashkenazi admixture. So here is a study that covers it. 60,000 years ago of interactions between Central and East Africa documented by major African mitochondrial haplogroup L2. And so it says L2A1 is the most complex subclade within L2A, and it harbors lineages from all African regions, as well as lineages from other continents, including non-African branches such as L2A1L2A connected to the Ashkenazi Jewish diaspora. L2A1A has clearly a West/Central African origin and distribution with many subclades suggesting a recent Bantu migration southwards, and is hardly present in Eastern Africa. L2A11 displays a similar pattern in sub-Saharan Africa, but with a particularity of a sub-branch present in Ashkenazi Jews, L2A1L2A. The clade L2A1 plus 143 shows several basal Eastern African lineages, together with Near Eastern and Arabian lineages that indicate a migration in the early Paleocene. Paleocene was during the time period of the Green Sahara. So you had ancient or old haplogroup L2 markers in Arabian and Near Eastern populations as far back as the Paleocene. And that's likely how you have that L2 sample in Syria. It's very important and interesting. Here's another study, the history of Slavic inferred from complete mitochondrial genome sequences. And this study says haplogroup L2A is widespread within Africa. Both of them could be assigned to the L2A1L2A clade and located on the same branch with the Ashkenazi Jewish haplotype. The L2A1 haplotype are observed in Germany, Romania, France, Russia, and Poland, as L2A haplotypes were reported in Ashkenazi Jewish population. The samples presenting haplogroup L2A1L2A might be further evidence of the occurrence of Ashkenazi Jewish mtDNAs in Polish mtDNA pool. And this is from Deb Cates. You can find this paper, The Tale of Jumel Tenza Tamar, a saga of the DNA mitochondrial haplogroup L2A. Excuse me for my mispronunciation. And so it says a working theory of how our L2A genetic haplogroup with subclades of West Africans, South American Africans, Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, Africans, and Caucasians of the Caribbean and throughout the American states, Romania Gypsies, and others all sprung from the same ancestries. The haplogroup branch known as L2A1, her descendant daughters will spread across Central Africa to the east area now called Ethiopia. Others of her descendants will head north along the coast, settling in North Africa and Egypt, and even reaching the Levant, now Syria, Israel, Jordan, and Turkey, while others found themselves mingling with non Africans, including Arabs, Hebrews, and Mediterranean traders from Spain and Italy. Somewhere in North Africa, most likely near Egypt, a baby girl is born with yet another mtDNA mutation. She starts the haplogroup branch known as L2A1. Some of her descendant daughters, along with others of their tribe, traveled into the Levant, or their daddies traveled into North Africa, and they began to intermarry with men belonging to the newly formed Hebrew tribes in the Levant. Thus, these people and their descendants came to identify as Jews. Some other descendants of our L2A1 Gal remained in Africa and migrated west. The Israelites who intermarried with African L2A1 women, that the common ancestries of the Jewish and African American branches of our match group was born. And again, you can check this out by Deborah Cates. Uh, and everything she said is pretty much what the papers that I read earlier said, that L2A would have expanded going into the Middle East and mixing with Middle Eastern populations. So she's sort of right about that. So with that being said, Azurad likely had mtDNA haplogroup L2A. mtDNA haplogroup L2A is found in ancient Syria and is among Jewish people even today. This makes mtDNA haplogroup L2 a great candidate for Azurad, an Afro-Semitic marker. This leads me to the next point about Eber and Azurad. The ancient union between Eber and Azurad is fascinating. Essentially, you have an old admixture event between old admixture event before Abraham of Asiatics and Africans. In anthropology, we can find this union. This book is called First Farmers: The Origins of Agricultural Societies. In the mid-Paleocene, desertification of the Sahara was was desertification of the Sahara with retraction of summer monsoon finally led to virtual abandonment of the Nabat's Plateau and other oasis settlements by around 4000 BC, and this might have led to a kind of refuge movement into the Nile Valley, where Saharan people would have met and mixed with the descendants of the Southwest Asian Neolithic populations, responsible for the introduction of Southwest Asian agricultural tradition into the Nile Valley about 1,500 years earlier. The, res- the result The resulting amalgam was later to develop into one of the most remarkable civilizations of the ancient world, a true synthesis of the Oriental and the African. Within the Egyptian Neolithic lifestyle are found a number of specific cultural items of presumed Palestinian origin, even though no uh, even though no precise source can be pinpointed. Such items included side-notched and tanged bifocal flaked arrowheads occurring in the PP and A pre-pottery Neolithic A and PP and B pre-pottery Neolithic B in the Levant, as well as in the Nile Valley. So basically, to sum this up, Saharan people would have mixed with Neolithic Levantines, and you start to see an amalgam of this culture basically in the Nile Valley and in the Levant. And of course, this is interesting because this kind of follows along with what I was saying about Eber and Azurad. So Shem and Ham, by proximity, were very close to each other, early Semitic people being in the Levant. and of course early Hamitic people being in the upper Nile, near where the rivers would have split. And you would have had a lot of early mixing between these Semites and Hamites. Due to, as I said, due to proximity, it makes sense that Semites and Hamites would mix with each other. From a young Earth perspective, this is one way to explain why early Semites appear African. It's due to ancient admixture. Remember, after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. From an older perspective, yes, Semites would straight up be Africans, but from a younger perspective, it's due to the heavy admixture with Africans that Semites may appear to be African. This leads me to the next point. I believe that this early and ancient admixture between Asiatics slash Semites and Africans slash Hamites, this union genetically and linguistically created Afro-Asiatic or Semitic Hamitic. After all, what are Afro-Asiatic people or Afro-Sans? Afro-Sans are a mix of Middle Easterners and Paleo-Africans. Middle Easterners with haplogroup DE, which is likely Shem, and Paleo-Africans with haplogroup AB, which is likely Ham. Afro-Asiatic languages, also called Afro-San languages, formerly Hemeto-Semitic, Semeto-Hamitic languages of common origin are found in northern part of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and some islands and adjacent areas in Western Asia. Massive migration into Africa associated with the spread of haplogroup DE and its subclade E. A new study concluded that there was a massive migration of non-African Eurasians back into Africa about 70,000 years ago, spreading the Eurasian haplogroups such as E and its parent DE within Africa, before additional waves of Eurasian admixture. Modern Africans thus are descendants of Paleo-Africans and Afro-Sans, Afro-Asiatics, which merged in Africa between 70,000 through 7,000 years to 40,000 years ago. Frequency of Y DNA haplogroup E in populations and hypothetical migration route from its ancestor clade DE in Southwest Asia, the Middle East. Haplogroup E arrived in Africa about 77 years ago and diversified in the Horn of Africa. It arrived together with specific West Eurasian alleles and later also diffused into various Paleo-African populations, as well as among ancient North African A and A, which were a population indigenous to North Africa and distinctly related or ancestral to modern West Eurasians. Haplogroup E and DE have a Middle Eastern origin. Haplogroup E migrated into Africa as part of a massive migration of basal Eurasians, ancestral West Asians, and then diffused and diversified within Africa, specifically the Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa. Haplogroup DE next to CF were the basal Eurasian lineages which expanded from the Middle East. The common ancestral lineage, Y-DNA atom, is suggested to have originated somewhere in the Middle East or the Iranian plateau. Massive Eurasian migration and following admixture created the many different African populations of today and are the reason for the high genetic diversity observed in sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, modern Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, formed from indigenous Paleo-African groups and intrusive Afro-Sans, basal Eurasians, and ancient North Africans. Finally, there is the fact why haplogroup E is dominant among non-hunter-gatherer Africans, hunter-gatherers in Africa, and it is within the Eurasian clade DE, while indigenous African hunter-gatherers belong to haplogroup A00, and B, which is what we said earlier about the Kushites and Hamites being haplogroup A and B markers, whereas E is something else entirely. Like it is Middle Eastern, it is likely Shem. And as I showed you earlier, haplogroup A is considered true African, whereas haplogroup E is Afro-Mediterranean, and haplogroup E came into Africa, pushing A and B southwards. You can use this understanding with a young Earth perspective, but also with the old Earth perspective. I want to put that out there again. But let's keep our focus on a young Earth. Basically, this admixture between Shemites and Hamites would have taken place around the time of Eber and Azurad. It was their union and their children that created Proto-Afro-Asiatics. We can even see this genetically. This book is Ancestral Journeys by Jane Mancro, and it says one language family is clearly linked to the spread of farming from the Near East. The Afro-Asiatic family includes ancient Egyptian and other languages that appear in early written records such as Akkadian and Mesopotamia. There is a genetic hint of arrivals from Africa. The African mtDNA L2A1 has been found at the farming settlement of Tel Helula in Syria at the pre-pottery level. Y-DNA E1B1B1 across both the north and southern coast of the Mediterranean is a clue that it was the male partner of L2A1. Then, the subclades of E1B1B1 helped to spread farming around the Mediterranean. So we see that haplogroup E and L2, they would have been partners. With that being said, what human population could best represent Eber and Azurad and their descendants in the Levant? It is likely the Natufians and Neolithic Levantines. Natufians are the ancestors of Afro-Asiatics, including Semites. This is from Cambridge, and it says, given the modern distribution of Semitic languages over the area uh, over the area in question, which belonged to the larger Afro-Asiatic family, it seems appropriate to suggest that these first farmers of the Levant and their Mesolithic predecessors, including the Natufian culture, were speaking a Proto-Afro-Asiatic language. It may be that Proto-Semitic continued to develop in the Levant and Syria area, since both Ebelite and Akkadian, early Semitic languages, are there attested early and formed around 2400 BC. So Natufians and early Semites, they were all in the Levant. Here's the area of Natufian culture, and that's basically the Levant. And this is from Alexander Matolov, The Prehistory of a Dispersal of Proto-Afrosans, Afroasiatic, Farming Lexicon. The Proto-Afrosan speakers can be identified with high probability with the creators of the Natufian and post-Natufian early Neolithic agricultural culture, archaeological culture of the Levant. The identification of Proto-Afrosans as Natufian and post-Natufians seems to satisfy all four criteria. Besides the farming lexicon, there are a set of reconstructed Proto-Afrosan terms pointing to the, in, the incipient animal breeding. Finally, the Levant appears to be an attested region from where population began to spread starting in the early Neolithic, covering not only wide tracts of southwestern Asia, but also the adjacent parts of the Mediterranean and Africa. Genetically speaking, Natufians are actually a split between Asiatics and Africans. Remember from this study, the Natufian sample consists of 61.2% Arabian, 21.2% North African, 10.9% Western Asian, and 6.8% Omotic ancestry. The Natufians genetically can be the best fit for the union of Eber and Azurad. Furthermore, the Y chromosome of Natufians is haplogroup E. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa, and that was from Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus revealed core of West Eurasian ancestry. Therefore, from a genetic point of view, we should focus on 1. The paternal ancestry or the paternal lineage of the Hebrews is likely haplogroup E. The maternal lineage of early Hebrew women is likely haplogroup L2A or L3. 3. The ancient autosomal DNA of early Hebrews is likely Natufian/Neolithic Levantine PPNB. This is what I'll look for when it comes to the Hebrew and Semitic ancestry. I would expect the Israelites to have this genetic makeup, and I will also expect the descendants of the Israelites to have a very similar ancestry as well. Again, all of this is based on the union between Eber and Azurad, an Asiatic/Semite and an African/Hamitic union. As the Book of Jubilees says, Eber, and he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod, and she bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. And here's just a visual representation of how this genealogy would look from Noah to Shem, all the way down to Eber, and then from Noah to Ham, all the way down to Azurad, this union between Shem and Ham, beginning with Eber and Azurad, Afro-Asiatic, or should I say Afro-Asiatic. And that concludes our video, Eber and Azurad, who are the descendants of Kush. And as I said before, I'll have a more in-depth video concerning the origins of Kush and his sons. But this is a nice teaser for the future video that I will do. And our next video would be Joktan, son of Eber. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the video and leave a comment concerning any questions you have for the video. And have a great day.